Tracy here. I would like to start by, first of all, we need to advance or make sure the slides are advancing. Can you give me controls of the slides, please? Thank you. Okay, one moment. Okay. All right, so let's dive right into this. If the slides will advance. Technology, you gotta love it, right? Okay, so this picture, Krista, what do you see when you look at this picture? I see stress, anxiety, frustration. And I chose this picture for a specific reason because this is often how people feel around the annual performance appraisal. I know I felt that way as an HR leader, as a person in the process, and I know I've talked to a lot of people that have. And so the real question is, why do we continue with the status quo? And that's the journey that I started on and that I'm going to share with you today. But before we do that, I would really like to get a quick pulse on how satisfied or dissatisfied or kind of on the fence you are with your performance management system. So you'll see a quick poll pop up. If you wouldn't mind just selecting one of those just so we can see how the audience is, you know, where you're at in this topic of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And we'll give it just another minute, or sorry, a couple more seconds, not another minute. Okay, and the poll should be popping up here quickly. Okay, so okay, pretty much what I expected, that the majority of people are dissatisfied or not sure that they're satisfied, and about 13% say they are satisfied. And this falls exactly in line with CEB's research that they recently did. And they found that less than 1 in 4 HR leaders was satisfied with their current performance process, and my slides are advancing for no reason, sorry guys, and less than 20% of executives and business leaders within the company are satisfied with the performance process driving business results. So you're right in line with, you know, the majority of folks. So now let's go through it and let me talk about SAVO and our journey and where we began, and I apologize for a few little delays here. Okay, so when I got to SAVO, and we'll talk about January of 2015 moving forward, we had a very traditional annual performance process. Employees did a self-review, managers did their review, hopefully they got together and talked about it, set goals for the next year. We did have pretty inconsistent goal setting and development planning. It depended on the employee, it depended on the manager, it depended on the department, but I would say it was highly inconsistent. What happened was our review scores began to be the key driver of pay increases. So doing the review resulted in the pay increase, and that became the key driver, and that's what everyone focused on. So it was like pulling teeth to get some people to do this. Some people did it great, some people didn't. But if it weren't for the, you know, the merit treatment, I would suspect not, I would be still pulling teeth with some people to try to get the performance reviews done. So nonetheless, it turned into a very dreaded process. Employees didn't like it, managers didn't like it, I didn't like it. No one really liked it, and it resulted in some disengagement in terms of you know, being a valuable process and having some feedback. So I knew we needed to disrupt the status quo, but the question was, how the heck do we do this? Because if it was simple, I think we all would have done it by now. So let's move forward. Sorry. We're having just a little bit of slight advancement. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that during this process, our business was in transformation. We were going through a tremendous amount of change. We had new private equity investment into our company. We had new senior leadership come into the company, and that included a new CEO and several other executives. One of the executives was the head of development, and he brought to the company a different software methodology. So that was a huge change we were going through. We had gone through several restructures as we were trying to determine what is the best organizational structure for our business to continue and really accelerate our growth. we were having higher than normal turnover for a technology firm, and engagement scores were quickly declining, and so that was very concerning to me. I think overall the organization had a lot of change fatigue. And so in my brilliance I said, we might as well change this process too, and that's what we did. So I started down a path of, oops, oh no, just lost the slides. Maybe you guys can get those back for me. Okay. Go. So sorry, guys. So we started down the path of this agile transformation. You know, like any good person, I do have backups, so hard copies. We started down the process of agile, and so one of the things that I think is important to understand is that with software development, there are two primary methods of development. Waterfall, which is top-down driven, long timelines, not very much flexibility, and agile, which is quite frankly just the opposite. And so we were going through an agile transformation. There are some of the key concepts of agile software development that are very pertinent to the entire organization. It's not just software that goes through this. It is permeated throughout the organization. So some of those are the active user has to be involved in the process. So customers have to be involved. Users of the software have to be involved. The team that is working on the software development has to be empowered to make decisions. It can't be waterfall where only the managers are making decisions. Small incremental releases and iterations are where it's at. And in before, you know, with waterfall, it was very long. You plan it out, you develop it, you test it, and you go back to the drawing board if you needed to. In this case, in Agile, you're doing things in real time, small increments, lots of iteration, and we like to say we fail fast. Testing and feedback is integrated throughout the process, and collaboration between departments and stakeholders is key to make this process work. And one of the key things that was really a big shift for us is that we had to really make sure that all of our leaders, our people leaders, had a service-based leadership style in order to make this successful. Okay, so here's where my brain started clicking. As we're going through all this change and we're going through this agile development transformation, some connections started to be made. So performance management is a process, just like software development is a process. Performance management is traditionally waterfall. You know, you could argue either way, but it is traditionally driven by the manager. And then performance management is not usually successful, and I should say traditional performance management is not that successful at quick iterations and change on the fly. And so you can kind of see where my brain was going. I was like, well, you know what? Agile is a process for software development. Why can't performance management be agile? And so that's where I started making the shift and saying, hey, let's talk about this. So I came up with 3 key agile aspects that I thought were really to performance management. The first one is employee involvement has to be key. It can't be driven by the managers, and employees have to own their own development, and the managers are there to support them, to help them, to guide them. It has to be forward-looking and not so much backward-looking. I don't know about you, but I can't remember what happened last year, unless, of course, I wrote it down. So why do we continue with this performance management where we're looking back for such a long period of time? And then capturing the requirements, capturing data about the employee shouldn't be a dreaded chore. And, you know, let's face it, a lot of the times when you're going through performance management, you know, it becomes about the process and the system and the chore of doing it versus, hey, let's give our employees some good feedback to help them develop and grow. So one of the things that I really wanted out of this is to drive continuous conversation about future performance and move away from these backward-looking ratings. So of course, you know, I did what every, you know, HR practitioner would do. I went and sought feedback from employees, from managers about the performance management process. I got buy-in from senior leadership, of course, and the next level of management. Everyone was aligned that, hey, we don't like this. It's not working out real well. So some of the key feedback that we had was we needed more regular discussions versus the system requirements. We needed to focus on goal setting aligned to department and company goals. Some of them weren't necessarily aligned or the path wasn't clear. employees really wanted time to talk about their individual development and career growth, not just what they did for the business. And employees gave us the feedback that managers needed to improve in their ability in having these critical conversations and delivering some constructive feedback. So we started with a transition. What I did is for Q2 and Q3, we implemented a quarterly check-in, and then the goals rolled into that check-in. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so what we ended up doing at Savo is the key objectives that we had were we wanted to realize the benefits of increased productivity and improved visibility, flexibility. We wanted feedback from multiple sources. Our development team was really good at this. They brought this idea forward. It's called circles, and a circle is just a group of people that an individual, 3 to 5 people that's not their direct manager, they would feel comfortable getting feedback from. So that was really cool, and it's working really well. So we wanted feedback from multiple sources. We wanted to make sure that the discussions were forward-looking and that we were course-correcting and supporting the employee quickly, and that the process was simple. At the end of the day, if it is a bad process, if it is a hard process, it doesn't matter what you do. For our people leaders, we had to have them shift from asking questions to listening, gathering feedback, and having that meaningful dialogue. And the how is equally important as to the what. So it had to all be tied to Savo's values and what we value within the organization. And then focus on regular conversations, not just once a year or once a quarter, to make sure that we're all aligned and employees feel like they're really having the ability to grow and develop at Savo. So we have another quick poll question here because I'd like to get your feedback. Do you think that continuous communication or the lack of it can affect employee performance? So bring up the poll. We have a yes, a no, and a maybe. Krista, I don't know about you, but I can kind of guess the answer to this, but let's see what our audience comes back with.
Yeah.
Just another couple of seconds and they'll put the poll results up. Okay, and is the poll ready? All right, it looks like, well, we kind of called it. We figured about, you know, the majority of people would say yes. I'd be interested to learn from the person that a couple of people or whoever, 5% said no. And but I truly do believe that continuous feedback, as long as it's done well, can positively affect employee performance. And when it's not done well, it can absolutely negatively affect employee performance. Okay, so when we looked at what kept me up through this process, and we are still in the process, I was really concerned managers might not embrace failure as a part of success. As traditionally as companies, you know, you frown upon failure, but in an agile environment, you have to embrace it, you fail fast, and you recover. I was concerned about employee retention. Will our managers have the skill to really provide the meaningful feedback that employees were looking for? And then how are we going to apply compensation scores with no annual review and no performance score? I was concerned about perception of fairness, and finally, just epic failure that this would not work, and you know, we would have to go back to the days of old, which I certainly wasn't willing to do. Okay, so our journey continues. I will say we had our last formal performance appraisal January 2016. We celebrated. It was great. We eulogized the annual performance review, and we really turned our focus towards goal setting tied to company and department goals with a focus on personal development goals. We wanted to make sure everybody had a stake in their development. I did decide to stick with quarterly check-ins for this year. I think it helps hold managers and employees accountable. Without some level of documentation, the process will go awry, in my opinion. So we do document process, we course correct, and we do use our system of record in order to do that. So we have some type of a paper file, or not a paper file, a record of these conversations that happened, so we can go back and look at them when we're going to apply compensation. And then this year we did a lot of focused skill development for our people managers to make sure that they have the tools and were prepared. So what did we learn? Any process is only as good as your managers. For some people it's in their DNA, others it's still pulling teeth. there is a risk of deteriorating motivation when it is not done well, and we've seen that in a couple of places, and we're addressing that, and that it's really important to document progress along the way. Learning to embrace failure was a big learning for us, that we had to really take a shift in our paradigm about failure and fail fast. You know, the whole process was really more about change management than it was about performance management. So having really good change management skills for HR and leaders is paramount. One of the things that we did is we spent a whole day off-site with all of our people leaders, and we focused on change management. The process is always evolving, and we have to understand that we're going to iterate and we're going to make changes. And then I think finally, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyhow, communicate more than you think is necessary. Okay, so how are we going to do compensation? Well, we're not doing it until next year, so I can't tell you how well it's going to work. But this is what we have planned and we've all agreed upon as a business. We're going to review compensation each quarter. It's going to be based on productivity. How do people do towards their goals? It's going to be based on their potential and growth. We do a kind of a modified 9-box. And, you know, how are people developing and how are they working through their personal development goals? Of course, we'll look at position and range and market competitiveness to make sure that our compensation philosophy is aligned with where we're going. And then our incentive compensation is going to be based on company financial and growth goals. So my last slide is in summary, and I will just say that I really feel that performance management is more of a conversation between a manager and employee where you're setting expectations, you're providing feedback, and you're course correcting. If there is an underlying relationship based on trust and respect, then that will work. If there is not, regardless of your performance management system, you're going to have problems. I view effective feedback as data that a person can choose to allow them to decide what type of behavior and what type of performance they're going to have. So I think it's really important because it is data for that person. And employees are absolutely responsible for their own career choice. The managers are there to support it. And documentation into the system is still very critical to hold everyone accountable. So with that, I am going to pass it off to my colleague Krista, and she's going to tell you about what's going on at Equity.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Good to see everybody. I was struck as I was listening to Tracy's story about how similar and yet different our experiences were. And I just want to point out to everybody one of the differences in our companies, or one of the differences in how we proceeded with the performance management process, was really the difference in our company and our cultures and our the business model. So where Tracy is a fairly young startup entrepreneurial type of a software company, we are not. We are a real estate company. We buy, sell, and build large apartment, high-rise communities in big cities. And that you don't do that fast. That takes a long time. And we've been around for a while, and I would say our employee base sort of matches that. We have many employees who have been here 20 years or more. I've been here 13 years. I think I just turned the corner. I'm no longer considered a new employee. So that's kind of important to keep in mind as you hear our story, because I'm fascinated by some of the things Tracy did. Some of them would not work or weren't necessary for us, but there are some things actually, Tracy, I want to pick your brain about afterwards, because I think there are some things you're doing that could work well for us. But one of the similarities we are both facing is that 30% of performance reviews result in decreased employee performance. That is a very interesting statistic we got off of the Talent Management 360 website, and I encourage you to check that out if you need or want any articles or case studies to help you figure out what you're going to do or to build a case. But that felt right to me. I felt like people were not excited, they weren't motivated, they weren't going to work even harder after our performance management process. Everybody looked depressed, or everybody was dreading, back to that dread word at Equity. We actually went out and surveyed folks and got a pretty consistent response that what they liked the least was this numerical rating, this number, which felt like a label or a grade. As you can see, somebody said, you know, I've had numerous reviews when my supervisor said they wanted to give me one rating, but they gave me a different rating because the compensation budget forced them to do that. somebody else said the scoring is a dishonest joke. We had just a lot of negativity around that rating. The reason it was like that, and I think most of you will relate to this, we had a compensation budget. We wanted to pay people based on performance, so we thought, and I think this is textbook, the performance rating should guide that compensation decision. And we tell people, don't think about the compensation decision, just look at Sally's performance and give her the rating she deserves, and then after the fact, we'll go and determine the right, and we actually had a spread, a matrix that would say, on your 5-point performance rating scale, if this person's a 3, that's a good, solid, strong performer. They deserve 100% of their bonus. That's how it works here. So that's theoretically made sense. It sounded good, but the reality was, whether it's because managers tend to overinflate those ratings, or, and I think this is true, we have a lot of high performers because they've been here a long time, and the business is relatively, we are always doing continuous improvement, but relatively what we're doing doesn't change that drastically, unlike maybe with software, we're constantly iterating in an agile process. We're not really doing that. So we had a lot of employees who were probably performing above a level 3, and so the managers would want to rate them at a 3.5 or a 3.6 or a 4, or God forbid, I mean, we laughed, you couldn't get above a 4 on a 5-point scale. And then after they'd submit their ratings, we'd have to push them back and say, well, now you're over budget. So now everybody get back in a room, calibrate your performance ratings. Remember that this is compared to one another, and based on that, let's come up with the best process. So that's why people really hated it. They hated being put in that. If you were an employee, you hated being forced into that rating, and if you were a manager, you hated not only that you had to be forcing someone into rating, but you probably had to sit into a number of meetings to calibrate those ratings. A lot of administrative time was spent. The good news is we found from employees they generally felt like they were getting the feedback they needed from their supervisor, so we didn't have to put a lot of energy into that part of our process, and they loved the fact that we had a goal-setting process that was working pretty effectively. So we realized the main pain was that ratings. The part about ratings. So let me walk you through. We have 2 distinct processes that are very hard to separate. One is the performance process and the other one's the comp process. But starting with the performance process, here's what was changing. Basically, no more numerical ratings. Your performance review is just words. There's no gold, silver, bronze, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like we used to have. And we're removing the one-to-one relationship from that performance rating to a compensation decision, which is what we used to have. So no rating and no direct link to compensation. What's staying the same are all the things that we all know are best things about performance management. I'm not ready to go to that poll quite yet. So you'll still have 3 to 5 performance goals. Employees still have a development goal. The goals have action items, and they're rated on metrics, and feedback's still really important, and we still have a performance review that we write at the end of the year. So the basics are still there. So now the next question is, how do we make performance linked to compensation? And this question really hung me up about making changes. I didn't know if we could. So I'm curious to hear from you. Do you think that you can fairly determine employee compensation without having performance ratings? I'd love to hear what you think, and I'll tell you what I thought before we started this process.
I'm banking on this, by the way.
I have to tell you while we're waiting, every conference I've been to in the last 5 years, I've gone, anything to do with performance management, every webinar, I've gone to see what did they do about comp. I get how to change it on the performance side, but how do you make it still linked to comp? Because our CEO, and practically every CEO I've ever worked for, wants to pay people based on performance. So let's see, what did we come up with? Or what did you guys all have to say? All right. It's a big question mark for most of us. Most of us said maybe. We want it to. We think it should. And quite a few think that it can be done. So I'm hoping that means some of you have done it and that you'll reach out to me after this. Because I'd love to hear stories about where you've done it and where it's worked. And then some of you believe you can't do it. I was kind of torn between the no and the maybe until we figured this out. And I think we have figured out how to do it in our culture and in our organization. I am not suggesting that what we did would necessarily work for the rest of you, but you might get some ideas from this. So just here's how our compensation process is changing. As I said, no year-end rating. This is what's really different. What we realized when we went back and studied how everybody has been rated over the last 5 years, that the majority of our employees were clustering around a 3 rating, which is a solid, good rating and would give them 100% on their target bonus. So it's okay, well, if everyone's coming out there, but we're having these calibration sessions, we're debating, are they a 3 or a 3-1, or are they a 3-1 or a 3-2, and sometimes for some of our employees, this was like $100, a few $100 difference. We were spending all this time figuring it out, and it wasn't motivating anybody. It just didn't seem worth all that energy. So we said, let's just accept that most of our employees are coming in at strong and default them to that place. And that's basically what we're going to do. And recognize that we have 5 to 10% who are going to be above that, who are going to hit it out of the park because they had some amazing project to work on or something. And there's going to be those few, and we don't have many of these, who just aren't cutting it. But meanwhile, when it comes to basic compensation philosophy, most things are staying the same. We still depend on performance as a key factor. We're just acknowledging that most of our employees are solid, strong performers. We still have market-based salary ranges. We still have our managers review the salaries on a regular basis to make sure they're competitive, and so on. All those things still exist. What this then led to, I'm going to pull up my notes, is basically three, you could almost say compensation buckets. One was this strong rating, and we had 80%, we predict 85% of our employees will fall into this category. This is what we call strong performer. And again, remember, we're not just making this up. We looked at the last 5 years, and about 85% of our employees were falling in that 2.9 to 3.3 rating spread, which is very close to getting 100% of target, give or take a tiny bit. So all those people will automatically get 100% of target. We recognize there'll be some exceptions. We think there'll be about 10%, and there'll be some upward exceptions and some downward. But again, we expect our upward exception significant increase in the old system. If you were a 3-1, you got 101% of your bonus. If you're a 3-2, about 102%. Whereas here we're saying, let's not quibble over the 101, 102, let's go from 100%, and then if you're really an upward exception, and there are only a very few employees who will be in any given year, you'll get 110% or more. Okay, so it's coming through. We did recognize that it might be challenging for our managers to now say, oh, I can't tell a lot of people that they're a little bit better than good. I can only tell a very few people that they're better than good. So we spent a significant amount of time trying to describe what each of those kind of ratings would be. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, but we gave people markers that made sense to us. Deliver, if you're a strong performer, means you deliver consistently on almost all of your objectives, if not all. Demonstrated what we call the 10 ways to be a winner behavior. That's cultural to us, and all you have to do is say 10 ways. Everybody knows exactly what that means, and that you're a valued performer. So we categorized each of these to help our managers determine where somebody falls. I think I just skipped a slide, or maybe I lost a slide, in which case it's an important slide. Yeah, the big concern. This is kind of important. So we got through this, and this took about a 6-month period where we had a sounding board that helped us figure it out and design it. We met with them. We focused on performance first. That was frankly the easier part. We figured out how to fix that. Then we kind of got stuck, like, oh, how are we going to determine the comp now? So we spent some time working on that. And along the way, we continued to keep the executive committee, so that was our CEO and his direct reports, up to date on what was going on. They were wildly excited because they recognized there was a lot of time being spent and not really a strong differentiation was in place. We thought there was. We told ourselves that story all those years. But we realized when we saw that data about how people were getting paid that we didn't really differentiate. So we got to the point where we were almost done. We got in front of our VP group and shared our plans, and one concern did emerge. And luckily, we weren't quite ready to launch. We shared with them as we were close to launching, but not quite done. And the big concern was, wait a minute, you have all these employees, and they're used to getting above target, and now you're going to tell them you're all just getting target. Not all, but most of you are just getting target. That's going to feel like a takeaway. And we actually had no intent of cost. This was not about cost-cutting measures. This was not about saving the company money. We had no intent of doing that. We really just wanted to streamline the process and make it more motivational. So what we did was we looked at each employee's pay for the last 3 years, and based on their incentive, how they did on their performance, looked at what they actually got on their bonuses. And for some people, you know, let's say they were a 3-2 one year, a 3-1 year, and a 3 the other year. The average of the 3 years was a 3-1 performance rating, which equated to X dollars. And we figured out those dollars were for, you know, our lower level employees, it was in the hundreds. For more senior people, it was in the many thousands. And then we said, okay, let's take that amount and we're going to build it into your bonus targets. So that assuming you hit strong performance, as 85% of our employees will, you'll get that pretty much guaranteed. It's built in. And that totally solved the problem. Everybody was thrilled. They loved that we did that. That built a lot of trust in the process. And people now, not only are executives and managers excited about the process, but our employees are very excited as well. The big lessons learned from this, I would say, were, one, we engaged a sounding board of cynics, skeptics, if you will. That is our typical process. But we knew who, especially around performance management, sometimes was the most outspoken. And we really depended on those folks to help us design this. And we actually had them present it to our VP group instead of HR, so it didn't look like an HR program. I'd say the other big learning was that our company history and data was telling us we weren't actually effectively paying for performance, at least not in the way we thought we were. And breaking that paradigm was probably the most significant way of shifting our executive leadership group to saying, oh, well, we are doing it, but not to the degree. We were spending a lot of time with the little teeniest differential. So that was important. We used, and other changes, we used the vision and the excitement of the future to guide us. But in this case, we really used the most significant pain points to make this change happen. For the employees, that big pain point was it wasn't motivational. They just didn't like it. They hated the ratings. And for managers who also were employees, so they already didn't like it for themselves, and then they hated delivering it because their employees didn't like it, and it took a ton of time and energy. The other thing so using those pain points was actually helpful because they were very painful. If they were slightly painful, I'm not sure that would have worked, but they were very painful, and so people were, I can't think of a rollout we've had in recent years that has met so much enthusiasm. So finally, the last 2 points we found were that the senior leaders, we did keep them very engaged, and this enabled us to not make this be an HR rollout. I mean, sure, the HR team were the ones doing the work, and we're the ones who guided the process, but I don't think most people here see it as HR-driven, which makes it a little bit more palatable when the bosses and the business leaders are the ones who are selling it and talking about it and excited by it. And then finally, because we had this potential that it would be seen as a takeaway, we figured out a financial way to ensure that didn't happen. So I think it's important to realize if you're embarking on this, if you have a company more like Tracy's, this process, you might not be able to put everybody into this big bucket of strong performers like we were able to do. But like I said, we have all these strong, steady, long-term employees. It worked for us. So with that, I think that's it. That's the end of my presentation and Tracy's. We're going to send this back to Synergita to say a few words before we take your Q&A. Take your questions and we'll answer them as best we can. So hold on for about 4 or 5 more minutes for a little more presentation from Synergita.
Thanks, Krista. It was a good one. I will take few minutes to introduce the product Synergita. Synergita is a continuous employee performance management software. It is a cloud-based software. So we have helped many organizations build a high-performance culture inside the organization. And Synergita is a full-fledged performance management suite. So we support features right from employee goal setting to continuous feedback, rewards and recognition programs, and periodic check-ins, and finally the annual reviews. It's a complete holistic employee performance management software. So these are some of our esteemed customers across the world. Currently we have customers from India, US and Middle East. And if you look into the details, we have got customers from multiple industries, IT, software services, manufacturing industries, and in fact we have customers from hospitality industry. And many of these customers are great place to work companies. Here is a quick look at the multiple modules and feature set available in the product. So the employee management module is all about managing the employee talent information in the software. And the performance management is the core module, which starts from the ability to manage the competency library, the goals library, and then the 360-degree feedback, the quarterly check-ins, and then the continuous feedback module, which allows the managers to give feedback anytime to the employees. And the product also includes a feature which helps the HR finally circulate the appraisal papers to the individual employees. The employee development module really focuses on employee development related activities in the organization. So at the end of the appraisal cycle, typically the organizations would create the employee development plans and focus on improvising the employees on various aspects, which includes recommending some of the training courses and stuff like that. So all of that are supported in the product, and all of these are supported very well with powerful analytics. So I will take you through some of the screenshots in the product. This is a HR dashboard, which is a powerful one for all the HRs and the line managers in the organizations, where they'll be able to take a quick stock of about the current status of the appraisal review cycles, and what is the bell curve. All of that can be easily accessed from the dashboard. The real-time goal setting. The goals are set during the beginning of the year, and then the achieved targets can be updated regularly in the software. So which really helps the organization to track the progress of the goals across the organization. Real-time feedback, I talked about the continuous feedback earlier. It gives ability for the HR, the managers, the department head to go and give feedback to the employees then and there. It really helps the employees improvise on the areas where they are lacking, instead of communicating the areas of improvement at the end of the year. The development discussions are very, very important for the employees to improve on the areas of lacking. So the product enables frequent discussion between the employees and the managers, and all those discussions are recorded in the software. The managers will be able to recommend the training courses and really get into the mentoring mode and help the team members deliver high performance. So here are the value propositions of Synergita as a product. Our promise to customers is zero disruption. Zero disruption in the sense the organizations will be able to implement the process which they are currently following. They need not change the process for the sake of implementing a software product. InstaGo is all about the ability to do the implementation very easily in a seamless manner without creating a disruption in the organization, and the Synergita can also be integrated with your HRIS software. Synergita believes in elevating the HR as a strategic partner. Since the product takes care of all those operational activities of running the appraisal reviews, the HR will be able to spend a lot of time on analyzing the data and focusing on strategic analysis. Here are some of the key differentiators of the product. Zero disruption, which I already talked about it, and we have got a lot of wow features. The first one would be like the manner the features are implemented in the product. It is a very easy to use product, and none of our customers have taken any training as such. They'll be able to log in into the software and start using it. And Synergita will give a digital cockpit where you will be able to refer all employee talent related information in one place, such as the employee skill set, the past work experience, the past feedback, current set of goals, and where they are currently, the continuous feedback. All of that can be managed very efficiently in the product. So we have a test drive available which everyone can try. You can log in into testdrive.synergita.com. You'll be able to experience the product. You can explore the various features that which are available. And if you want to get any additional info, we'll be glad to assist you. You can drop an email to info@synergita.com. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhakar.
So hopefully everyone can do that.
Okay, so let's start with some of the question answer session. Okay, so here comes the first question. How have your employees accommodated this change? Was there any initial resistance? Tracy, Krista, anybody would like to answer this?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. For the most part, the employees were involved in the decision, so they embraced the change, but there's always a few that really don't like change and wanted the status quo. We're still kind of into it, so it's really hard to tell for sure, but I think if I polled my employees and said, who wants to go back to the annual performance review, I might get 2. So I think they really are enjoying it. It's just a matter of iterating and getting it to a point where it really has become a part of our culture, this continuous feedback mechanisms versus an annual review.
I think for ours it's almost only a positive. Until we had the whole mathematical formula figured out how we were going to keep people whole on our system, there were people saying, well, you say you're going to keep us whole, but until I know how you're going to figure that out, I'm not sure I trust it. As soon as we gave everybody an individual compensation sheet that showed them how we did the math, what their average comp was, how much of that was over the 100%, and then how that moved into their targets. Once they saw that, we haven't heard anyone with any resistance.
Okay, thanks Tracy, thanks Krista. Here comes another question from one of our audience. Are your managers comfortable to check in periodically to communicate with the employees? Does it create any conflict while giving the feedback?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually think you've done more work on that than we have. I think that's our project next year. Our employees told us they felt they were getting sufficient feedback from their managers, and I really think that's code for, I don't know if I want that much feedback from my manager. But we have started doing some new workshops and getting people to really engage in the conversation. I think that's a lifelong challenge because no one likes to make people, say something that might be hard, makes people feel bad or makes somebody mad or sad or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. It was one of my key concerns, and so what we did is we took our leadership team off-site. We actually did 2 days of, not at the same time, and we did one around change management and we did one around effective communications, having critical conversations. Now, will I say that everyone does a great job? No, of course not, because everyone's a little bit different. People are still going to be, have a hard time with conflict. but I will say we've had some great improvements. And with practice, again, fail fast, make improvements, I really feel comfortable that many of the people managers are there.
Okay, so here comes another question. How are you dealing with separations that then get elevated to a legal matter?
I'm not sure I understand that question. I mean, I don't think it changes at all. I mean, I don't understand why that would change with the performance management.
We're still documenting. Are you still documenting?
Yeah.
We're both our systems. We're still documenting performance. So the only thing is we don't have ratings on it at the end, but we're doing everything else that you would do in a performance management system. So if it became a legal issue, I don't think we'd have any additional challenges, unless I'm not understanding the question.
Yeah, what I would add to that is if there is a true performance issue and it's not just about development feedback, that's handled a little bit separately. You know, it's done through a performance IDP process to help the employee understand their shortcomings and then hopefully improve upon those. So if there is truly a significant issue, it is handled a little bit outside of what I would just call this development feedback, this ongoing feedback.
Yeah, same here. If someone's at risk of being let go or terminated, we move into a different documentation process as well. But let's just play that out. In our system, if that were the case, they would get a rating. They wouldn't get a rating, but they would be given a below an exception, a downward exception, and the message would match that, and there would be written words around their performance challenges. So I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay, so here comes a question for Tracy especially. What is the message you would like to share regarding 360-degree feedback and periodic check reviews?
Well, the message I would say, I'm not sure that I'm proposing 360-degree feedback in every situation. I think that's sometimes a little too limiting. But what I think is really important is that employees have to own their own development. They need to seek feedback. Managers need to give it. And other people, teams, people that they've worked with, it's really important to get that rounded feedback, you know, whether it be through a 360, a formal 360, or informally. I think that's really important for an individual, and some people are more comfortable seeking the feedback and some people are not. Like I was talking about our development team, a lot of them are doing these things called circles where they're picking 3 to 5 people and they're going to those 3 to 5 people and asking them, hey, will you be in my feedback circle? And asking them to kind of set rules about how they're going to feedback information, you know, like if they're in a team meeting or, you know, whatever it might be. And so I think that's really cool because the employees are driving it and it's not a management-driven process. So I think personally for our type of company, that is going to be more impactful than a standard 360, which now becomes forced and it becomes a process and it becomes just like the performance review where people are going to dread it. So I think, you know, it's all about being agile, getting feedback, course correcting, celebrating successes on just in time.
Okay, Tracy, thanks for that. Okay, there's one question for equity residential. They have asked that for equity residential, how did they know that they were setting expectations well and that they were assessing well 3 years or just not assessing accurately?
Well, good question. We had a calibration process at each level within each department. So if you trust that they're peers, so let's say, I think what you're implying is there were managers perhaps who are overinflating or not setting difficult goals, so therefore people are getting skewed upward. And that is a dilemma, and I suspect there are a few of them. I mean, we all suspect there are a few of those. And you kind of, actually, certain people did get a reputation of either being what you're describing in your question, an overinflator, or, you know, it's kind of a softball goals that are or softball grader. But we also had a few people who had a reputation of being the other, like super hard grader, nobody could get a good rating in their department. So the way we countered that was we did encourage, and I'd say most departments did this. It wasn't 100% followed, and it wasn't 100% required. but they would calibrate and they would get in a room together, all the managers, people about the same level within a certain department, and they knew each other and their people well enough that they could test each other or poke holes. So it wasn't perfect, but I think that is a good, sound performance management practice to encourage similar. When we rating approach. When we first started the process, this was like 10, 11 years ago, people felt it wasn't fair and that managers had favorites, so that's why we instituted this calibration process. And we noticed managers shifting on their own. Like you'd hear your 3 peers describe their employees that were super high performers, and we noticed that those managers would start to adjust on their own. So, you know, now, is it possible over years that the system all just kind of accepts it after a while? I can't say to that, but I would say that is the best answer I can think of to avoid that. Good question.
Thank you, Krista. Okay, so here comes another question for Tracy. Does your incentive compensation have any individual contribution factor, or are all receiving a bonus amount based on position and the company's annual performance?
Yeah, so for this year, we do have it based on company performance and position. It does not currently have an individual performance component to it. We have had that in the past, and we shifted away from that. Not sure exactly what we're going to have next year, but for 2016, it is largely based on company performance. We may throw in an individual component. It's very discretionary towards the end of the year or as we're sitting down and doing it. But right now, we do have that based on company performance.
Okay, so here's another question for Prabhakar, I guess. Does the Synergita platform provide all employees the ability to give easy, spontaneous feedback to each other, or for an employee to initiate feedback on a specific project or from a specific group?
It's a good question. So Synergita provides both the options. The employees will be able to give feedback to any other employee in the organization, and it is also possible to trigger a request to give feedback about a specific project. So both are possible in Synergita application. Now, for example, there could be a scenario where the employee may want to get feedback from an internal customer or even from an external customer. So the product supports the ability to get feedback from a customer who is not part of the employee organization. It is possible to trigger a request to the customer. The system will send out an email to the customer contact with a link. So the customer contact can simply click the link. It will open the feedback form where he or she will be able to give the feedback to the employee. And you all will agree that the moment we get feedback from the customer, it adds a lot of value to the whole system.
Thank you, Prabhakar. Okay, wind up. Okay, so there are a lot more questions triggering in. I think it's time to wind up now. We'll send all the questions which are not answered through email, and we'll send the recorded version also through email. Thank you, Tracy, Krista, and Prabhakar for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you all for attending the session. Hope you all had a good and informative session. If you have any other questions, please feel free to send the email at info@synergita.com. So thank you all for attending this session. Bye-bye. Take care.